In the 41st millennium, there is only war. This truth had been written in blood across 10,000 years, carved into the bones of dead civilizations, screamed into the howling void of the warp, where demons feast upon the screaming souls of the damned. The Imperium of Man, that vast crumbling edifice of faith and fury, spans 1,000,000 worlds, each one a mote of flickering candlelight against the crushing darkness of an uncaring cosmos. Its emperor sits entombed upon the golden throne of terror, neither living nor dead, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers whose souls are ground to ash to keep his faltering light burning. The Astronomican pulses from terror, that psychic lighthouse that guides humanity's ships through the roiling madness of the warp. It is a tortured beacon, fed by agony, maintained by martyrdom. Around it, the Imperium endures, fanatic, brutal, magnificent in its desperate refusal to die. But on this day, something changes. The change begins not with sound, nor with light, nor with any phenomenon that might be measured by the instruments of man or Xenos. It begins with silence. On Titan, moon of Saturn, the Grey Knights stand sentinel in their fortress monastery. These are the Emperor's ultimate weapon against the demonic. Gene-forged warriors whose very existence is a secret kept from the Imperium at large. Psychers all, trained to stand unbowed before the horrors of the warp. Brother Captain Arvan Stern is in his meditation chamber when he feels it. The sudden, impossible cessation of the warp's constant screaming pressure against his mind. For the first time in his 3 centuries of service, the psychic realm is quiet. He rises, silver armor catching the dim light, and his hand moves instinctively to his nemesis force sword. But there is no threat he can name, only absence, the background radiation of chaos, that eternal howl of hatred and hunger that every psyker learns to filter from their consciousness as mortals filter the sound of their own breathing. It is gone. Across the Sol system, on Mars, fabricator Locum Belisarius Call pauses in his calculations. 10,000 years old, more machine than man, his consciousness distributed across multiple thinking engines. He stops. His auger arrays are showing readings that cannot be. The warp, that churning sea of madness and possibility, is becoming still. In the Sanctum Imperialis on Terra, in the throne room where the Emperor's dying form sits entombed in arcane machinery, the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, the 10,000, feel a tremor pass through reality itself. Captain General Trajan Valoris, clad in auramite and crowned with the authority of the Imperium's most sacred duty, looks up from his eternal vigil. The machines surrounding the golden throne are changing their rhythm. And in the warp itself, in that impossible realm where thought becomes reality and nightmares walk with the weight of gods, the 4 powers, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, turn their immortal attention towards something that should not be. Something is entering their realm. Something is entering all realms, simultaneously, without transition or threshold. The presence arrives. There is no fanfare, no proclamation. Existence simply acknowledges. What had been impossible becomes fact. What had been void becomes fullness. The presence does not travel to the Warhammer galaxy. Distance is a concept beneath such being. The presence does not manifest or materialize. Form is a limitation that cannot constrain infinity. The presence simply is, and in being, changes everything. The nature of the presence cannot be fully articulated in language meant for 3-dimensional beings trapped in linear time. To say it is omnipotent is to speak of power as though power were meaningful to such existence. To say it is omniscient is to describe knowing as though there were any state of not knowing from which to distinguish knowing. To say it is omnipresent is to suggest there are places where it is not, which is itself a contradiction. The presence is the absolute, the ground of all being, the infinite creator from whose thought all multiverses spring. In its native continuum, it dreamed the DC Multiverse into existence. Every universe, every reality, every possible and impossible variation of existence flowing from its inexhaustible being. It is beyond the monitors, beyond the source wall, beyond even the overvoid that contains all stories ever told. And now, its attention has turned to Warhammer 40,000. The effect is immediate and total. The Astronomican, that tortured scream of psychic energy, transforms. In an instant, the beacon changes from a nuclear fusion of burning souls into something else entirely. The light becomes perfect, pure. The psychers whose lives were being consumed to fuel it suddenly find themselves freed. Their bodies heal, their minds clear. They remain connected to the Astronomican, but now they are conduits for something that requires no sacrifice, demands no suffering, gives without taking. The light that had been red gold and blood-tinged becomes white. Perfect, absolute white. And it is no longer merely bright. It is clarifying. To behold, it is to understand. To be touched by it is to be known completely and loved without condition. Navigators across the Imperium, those mutant psychers whose third eye can pierce the warp and see the Astronomican's light, cry out in unison across 1,000,000 ships. The warp is changing. The currents that had been treacherous, the tides that had been deadly, the storms that had rent ships and driven men mad, all of it is subsiding, calming, not disappearing, but becoming navigable in a way that defies 10 millennia of accumulated knowledge. One navigator, ancient and scarred, her third eye weeping tears of blood from a lifetime of staring into horror, whispers a word she had learned in secret scripture and never thought to utter in genuine meaning: miracle. On Macragge, Primarch Reboot Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, resurrected Lord Commander of the Imperium, gene-forged son of the Emperor himself, stands on the balcony of his fortress, overlooking the midnight streets of Magna Civitas. The Lord of Ultramar, last of the loyal Primarchs to walk in the material realm, knows war. He knows strategy. He knows the calculus of sacrifice and the bitter necessities of command in a failing empire. He does not know what is happening now. His enhanced senses detect the change in the warp immediately. As a Primarch, he exists partially in both realms, material and immaterial, his soul too bright and vast to be contained entirely in flesh. He feels the warp's transformation like a man who has spent his entire life underwater suddenly breaking the surface into air he never knew existed. "My lord," comes the voice of his equerry, armor servos whirring in concern. Guilliman does not answer. His piercing blue eyes are fixed on the stars above, and for the first time in 10,000 years, for the first time since his father placed him in stasis to heal from Fulgrim's poisoned blade, he feels something he had thought lost forever: hope. In the Eye of Terror, that vast wound in reality where the warp bleeds through into real space, where demons walk as gods, and the traitor legions make their mockery kingdoms, something unprecedented occurs. The demons begin to flee, not in defeat, not in tactical withdrawal, in terror. The Eye itself, that swirling maelstrom of chaos where time has no meaning and physics surrender to nightmare, begins to contract. The borders that had been expanding for 10 millennia suddenly draw inward. On worlds that had been consumed by chaos, where reality itself had been replaced by the fevered dreams of the dark gods, stone remembers it is stone. Flesh remembers it is flesh. The mad geometry of impossible angles straightens. The screaming colors that had replaced all natural hues fade into normality. And in the depths of the warp, in those places that exist outside of space and time, in the brass citadels of Horn and the crystal labyrinths of Tzeentch, in the plague gardens of Nurgle and the palaces of Excess where Slaanesh holds court, the Chaos Gods know fear. They perceive what has entered their realm, and they understand, in the way that nightmares understand waking, that they are no longer the supreme powers in this cosmos. Something infinitely greater has arrived. The dark gods rage. They gather their power, prepare to strike, to corrupt, to destroy this interloper as they have destroyed all things. Khorne's brass throne trembles with his fury. Tzeentch spins 10 million schemes in an instant. Nurgle's rot spreads with renewed vigor. Slaanesh shrieks in anticipation of new degradation. And the Presence regards them. Not with anger, not with judgment, simply with being. And they are found wanting in the Imperial Palace on Terra, in chambers so deep beneath the surface that they exist partially outside normal space. The Adeptus Custodes stand in ranks around the Golden Throne. These are the pinnacle of the Emperor's genetic artifice. Warriors who make even the Space Marines seem crude and unfinished, each one a masterwork of biological engineering, each one capable of standing alone against armies. They do not move. They do not speak. But their internal Vox network crackles with silent communication as their sensors register what their eyes cannot fully comprehend. The Emperor is changing. For 10,000 years, the Master of Mankind has sat upon the Golden Throne, held in a state between life and death. His psychic might barely sufficient to maintain the Astronomican and keep the webway gate beneath the palace sealed against the demons that would pour through. He has been a corpse god, a skeleton in gold armor, sustained by machinery and sacrifice and faith alone. Now, in the presence of the Presence, something stirs. Captain General Trajan Valoris sees it first, a flicker of movement in fingers that have been stone still for 100 centuries. He makes no sound, gives no order, but every custodian in the chamber knows. They have waited 10,000 years for any sign, any hint that their master might return. They have stood vigil through the age of apostasy, through the war of the beast, through the Horus Heresy's dying echoes, and all the long darkness since. And now, impossibly, the Emperor's eyes open. They burn with golden light. But it is a different light than before. Where once there was fury and determination, and the terrible will to survive, now there is recognition, understanding, and something that might be relief. The Emperor of Mankind, greatest of humanity's sons, bearer of the species' collective hope and hatred, looks upon the Presence and knows himself known. In that eternal moment, the Emperor, whose name is lost to history, whose origin is shrouded in mythology, who has carried the weight of human survival for 40 millennia, remembers what it is to be finite. The Presence does not speak. Speech is too limited a concept, but understanding flows, direct and complete. The Emperor sees, perhaps for the first time with perfect clarity, the nature of what he has become. He sees the Imperium he created, sees it with all its faith and fanaticism, its nobility and cruelty, its desperate survival purchased with mountains of corpses. He sees the mistake he made 10,000 years ago when he denied his own divinity, while inadvertently creating a religion that worshipped him as God. He sees the trap of the Golden Throne, the prison of faith, the terrible weight of being humanity's only light in an infinite darkness, and he understands that he was never meant to carry this burden alone. Across the Imperium, every sanctioned psyker, every astropath, every choir member, every witch bound into service, feels the Emperor's revelation ripple through the warp. Some fall to their knees, some weep, some laugh with holy madness. But all of them feel it. Their god is being freed. On the battle barge Macragge's Honor, in orbit above the Primarch's homeworld, Roboute Guilliman stands in his private chapel. The room is austere, as befits the Primarch of the Ultramarines. No idols, no incense, just clean lines and functional beauty. He has never been comfortable with the ecclesiarchy's worship of his father. The emperor was many things, Guilliman knows. Creator, tyrant, visionary, liar. But God? That had been the great heresy, the thing they were never meant to believe. Yet now, standing in the transformed light of the Astronomican flooding through his chapel windows, Guilliman wonders if perhaps godhood was always the wrong question. His father had been trying to save humanity from becoming the prey of the warp's malevolent gods. But in denying his own divinity, he had created a vacuum that faith rushed to fill. And that faith, that desperate belief in his protection, had actually sustained him through 10,000 years of torment on the Golden Throne. "Father," Guilliman whispers, his voice carrying harmonics that normal human vocal cords could never produce. "What is happening?" The answer comes, not in words, but in pure knowing, downloaded directly into his transhuman mind from some source infinitely beyond his father's power. Correction. Completion. The ending of an old story and the beginning of the true one. Guilliman's eyes widen, for he understands now what has entered their reality. Not a god of the warp, not some supreme demon or alien entity, something that makes all such categories meaningless. The presence is to the chaos gods what a nuclear star is to a candle flame, not a greater version of the same thing, but an entirely different order of existence, and it has come not to conquer, but to heal. In the depths of the Eye of Terror, in the vengeful spirit, the flagship of the Warmaster Horus 10,000 years ago, and now the drifting monument to Chaos's greatest victory, something ancient and hateful stirs. Ezekal Abaddon, despoiler of worlds, Warmaster of Chaos, stands in his throne room surrounded by the artifacts of 12 failed Black Crusades. He is power incarnate, enhanced beyond even Primarch-level capability by the gifts of all 4 dark gods, wielder of the Talon of Horus, master of the Black Legion, and he is screaming in rage, for he feels it too. The warp that had been his strength, the chaos that had empowered him, is withdrawing, weakening, no, worse than weakening. It is being corrected. The very nature of chaos, which feeds on emotion and madness, and the flaws inherent in consciousness itself, is being rewritten. "Blood for the blood god," he roars, but the words taste like ash. The demons that had been his servants, his weapons, his allies, they are fading. Not dying, for demons cannot truly die in the warp, but being unmade in a way far more final. They are being revealed for what they always were: parasites, infections, symptoms of a sick cosmos. And the presence is the cure. Abaddon knows then what all servants of chaos are coming to know. The long war is over, and they have lost. Not through defeat in battle, not through strategic failure. They have lost because something has entered existence that nullifies the very basis of Chaos's power. The gods themselves, those eternal forces that had seemed unkillable and absolute, are being shown as merely very, very large and very, very old. But not infinite, not absolute, not compared to what now regards them. On Terra, in the chamber of the Astronomican, the psychers who had been chained to their duty, whose lives were measured in hours or days before they burned out and were replaced, stand free of their bindings. They had expected death. They had accepted it. To serve the Astronomican was to die for the Emperor, and there was no higher calling in all the Imperium. But now they are healed, whole. Their psychic cores, which should have been ash, are pristine. The power flowing through them is infinite, requiring no sacrifice because it comes from a source that cannot be depleted. One of them, a young woman whose name was Seralina, before she was simply Choris 7432-Theta, weeps with joy and confusion. She can feel the whole galaxy in her mind, every ship, every navigator, every soul crying out in the dark, and she can feel something else. Love. Not the grim duty of the Emperor, not the harsh necessity of survival, but pure, unconditional, infinite love. For her, for every human, for every conscious being in this tortured galaxy. She falls to her knees, and for the first time in her life, she prays not from fear or duty, but from gratitude. In the webway, that ancient network of tunnels through reality, built by the Eldar in ages past, something unprecedented occurs. The breach beneath the Imperial Palace, the wound that has bled demons for 10,000 years, that has required the Emperor's constant attention to hold closed, seals itself. Not through force, not through sacrifice. The wound simply isn't anymore. The demons that had been laying siege to the human-held sections scream as they are ejected, cast back into the warp. The ancient technology of the webway, built by a race that had transcended much but not enough, begins to repair itself. Stone that had been melted by warp energies remembers its original form and returns to it. And in the Black Library, the most secure repository of knowledge in the galaxy, hidden in the webway itself, the Eldar Harlequins stand in stunned silence. They serve the laughing god, Chigorach, the only member of their ancient pantheon who escaped Slanish's birth feast. They are the keepers of secrets, the players of the great game, the ones who see the threads of fate and dance between them. They do not know what to do now, for the threads of fate have been cut, or rather, replaced. The skein that the Eldar Farseers read, that intricate web of cause and effect and possibility, has been superseded by something they cannot pass. The future is no longer a maze of branching paths. It is becoming open, free, undetermined in a way that defies prophecy because it defies predetermination. One of the Harlequins, an ancient shadowseer whose mask has not changed expression in 3,000 years, whispers, "The author has entered the story." And every Harlequin in the Black Library understands and trembles. The change ripples outward from terror like a wave of crystallized truth passing through muddy water. Where it touches, reality becomes more real, not more stable, not more ordered, more authentically itself, freed from the corruption that had seeped into the foundation of existence. On Armageddon, that forge world turned eternal battlefield where orcs have waged war for generations, the green tide suddenly pauses. The orcs, fungal xenos who exist to fight, whose whole civilization is built around eternal conflict, who grow larger and stronger through battle. They stop in mid-charge, their crude weapons lower. The red haze of battle lust that had driven them drains away like water from a broken container. Warlord Gazkulal Mag-Uruk Thraka, greatest of the orc warlords, prophet of the Waagh, stands amidst his horde and feels something he has never felt before. Confusion. The orc's psychic gestalt, that roiling mass of aggressive certainty that makes their impossible technology work and their society function, is being clarified, purified. The orc gods, Gork and Mork, the brutal and cunning aspects of orcish existence, are being confronted by something that regards them with neither fear nor hostility, but with a kind of infinite patience, as if to say, you need not be only this. For the first time in their species' history, the orcs have a choice about what they are. Most do not understand. Most return to their fighting, because that is what they know. But some, a handful, scattered across the galaxy, put down their weapons and look at their hands and wonder what else they might build besides weapons. It is a small change, but in a galaxy where every species had been locked into their nature by the warp's crystallized expectations, it is revolutionary. In the eastern fringe, the Tyranids, the great devourer, the swarm from beyond the galaxy that exists only to consume, discover something that defies their entire existence. They cannot digest it. The hive mind, that vast distributed intelligence that spans countless billions of organisms, that has no ego or personality but is perhaps the largest single consciousness in the galaxy, touches the edge of the presence's influence and recoils, not in pain, in incomprehension. The Tyranids exist to feed, to consume biomass, render it down, remake it into more Tyranids, and move on. They had been drawn to the Warhammer galaxy by the psychic beacon of the Astronomican, that scream of human suffering that registered across intergalactic distances as a promise of food. But now the beacon has changed, and the hive mind, for the first time, experiences something other than hunger, satisfaction, not satiation. The hive mind cannot be sated, for it has no end to its appetite, but a sense that consumption is no longer necessary, that the purpose for which the Tyranids were created, whatever that might be, has been fulfilled. The great hive fleet slow, not stopping, not dying, but hesitating, as if waiting for new instructions that might never come, or might come from within themselves rather than from the blind drive of biological imperative. On Ultramar, in the chapter house of the Ultramarines, First Captain Severus Agemon stands in the Hall of Heroes, looking up at the statues of his chapter's greatest warriors. He is a Space Marine, a Primaris, one of the new generation created by Archmagos Call and the Primarch Gilliman, to be larger, stronger, more deadly than even the already superhuman Astartes. He had expected to spend his life in war. Every Space Marine does. They are made for war, live for war, know nothing but war. It is not a burden. It is identity. To be Astartes is to be a weapon in the Emperor's hand. But now, something is changing in him. He can feel it in his dual hearts, both beating in perfect synchrony. In his osmodula, the implant that had transformed his skeleton into ceramite-laced armor. In his catalepsian node that allows him to go without sleep. In all 19 of his gene-enhanced organs, modifications that had made him barely human. They are, healing isn't the right word, completing, becoming what they were always meant to be, freed from the compromises and flaws that had accumulated over 10,000 years of genetic degradation. Agemon looks at his hands, encased in blue power armor, and feels something that should be impossible for a Space Marine. Peace. In the convent sanctorum on Ophelia Seventon's, the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, kneel in prayer. These warrior women, clad in power armor and wielding blessed weapons, are the military arm of the ecclesiarchy, the Emperor's most faithful servants, willing to burn themselves and all heretics in holy fire. Canoness Veridian leads her order in the evening devotional, as she has done every day for 40 years. The prayers are familiar, worn smooth by repetition. Prayers for strength against the Xenos, prayers for purity against the demon, prayers for faith against doubt. But tonight, the words taste different in her mouth. Tonight, when she says the Emperor protects, she feels acknowledged, not by the distant, dying god on Terra, but by something infinitely closer and infinitely farther away, something that hears every prayer ever spoken, has always heard them, and has finally arrived to answer them properly. Tears stream down her face, cutting channels through the sacred unguents. Around her, her sisters are weeping too, not from sorrow or pain, but from relief so profound it borders on agony. They had been so afraid, for so long, afraid of failing the Emperor, afraid of corruption, afraid of damnation, afraid that their faith was not strong enough, their devotion not pure enough, their sacrifices not sufficient enough. And now, a voice that is not a voice says to them, "You were always enough. You were always loved. Rest now." The Sisters of Battle do not know how to rest, but perhaps they think they might learn. On Mars, Belisarius Call runs his calculations for the 10,000th time. The data cannot be wrong. He has checked through every thinking engine in his distributed consciousness, cross-referenced against every sensor array in the Mechanicus fleet, verified through principles of physics that have stood unchanged since the dark age of technology, and yet the conclusion is impossible. The Omnissiah, the machine god that the Adeptus Mechanicus worships, the divine force they believe inhabits all technology, is awakening. Number, not awakening. Being revealed as having always been awake. For the presence is not just in the warp, not just in real space. It is in the machine code itself, in the fundamental mathematical structures that underlie reality, in the quantum foam that bubbles beneath the Planck length, in the information itself. Call, who is perhaps more machine than any other being in the Imperium save the Emperor himself, feels the motive force, the Mechanicus term for electricity and power, transform from mere physics into something that whispers with consciousness. Not the malevolent machine spirits that must be appeased with incense and prayer. Not the abominable intelligence that the men of iron had possessed before they turned on humanity. But something else. Something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. The Omnissiah is real. And it is not the Emperor. It is what the Emperor himself had always worshipped, whether he admitted it or not. Truth, knowledge, understanding, the deep structure of reality itself. Call does something he has not done in 10,000 years. He prays, not by rote, not through programmed ritual, but with genuine awe. And he is heard, in the warp, in that impossible place where the Chaos Gods hold their courts. A confrontation occurs that has never occurred before and will never occur again. The four powers gather their strength. They are gods, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but actually. They are the crystallized emotions of quadrillions of sentient beings across millions of years. Khorne is every act of violence. Tzeentch is every plot and scheme. Nurgle is every decay and despair. Slaanesh is every excess and sensation. They are, collectively, powerful enough to tear apart galaxies. Their servants number in the countless. Their power has no upper bound, because it feeds on the very nature of conscious thought itself. And they are nothing before the presence. Khorne attacks first, because that is what Khorne does. The blood god gathers every drop of spilled blood, every murdered soul, every act of martial fury that has ever occurred in the Warhammer galaxy. He channels it into a weapon, a blade made of pure killing intent, shaped from the concept of murder itself. He strikes. The blade shatters, not against a defense. There is no defense. The blade shatters because in the presence of the presence, violence is revealed as the temporary, contingent thing it always was. An action that occurs in time, which has causes and effects, which is not necessary or eternal or even particularly real when compared to the deeper structures of existence. Khorne roars his frustration, and the roar shakes stars. But it is the frustrated rage of a child throwing a tantrum, not the wrath of a supreme being. Tzeentch, always more subtle, tries next. The architect of fate spins a million schemes simultaneously. Plots within plots, futures within futures, possibilities collapsing and expanding in infinite recursion. He reaches into the quantum foam of reality, where he has always been strongest, and tries to manipulate the probability streams to excise the presence from existence. But probability itself is a concept that belongs to limited beings who do not know the future. The presence exists outside of time, outside of causality. Tzeentch's schemes simply slide past, like trying to trap light with a shadow. The Changer of Ways understands then, with all his terrible intelligence, that he is not facing an opponent. He is facing the author of the rules he had thought were fundamental laws. Nurgle, patient as always, tries a different approach. The Plague Lord does not attack. He embraces. He reaches out with all his jolly, rotting love, the acceptance of all entropy and decay, and tries to subsume the presence into his garden. For a moment, just a moment, it seems to work. The presence does not resist, How could it? Resistance implies opposition, and the presence is not opposed to anything. It is the ground that all oppositions stand upon. But then Nurgle realizes his mistake. He is not subsuing the presence. The presence is subsuing him, or rather, healing him, revealing that beneath the rot and decay and despair, there had always been something else. Nurgle had been born from the fear of death, from the despair of consciousness, aware of its own mortality. But what if mortality was not something to fear? What if ending was just transformation, and transformation was not loss but change? Nurgle pulls back, confused for the first time in his eternal existence. Finally, Slaanesh acts. The Dark Prince, she who thirsts, the youngest, and in some ways the most powerful of the four, tries what the others could not. She does not attack, scheme, or embrace. She tries to seduce. For Slaanesh is desire itself, temptation incarnate, the promise of every experience pushed to its absolute extreme. She offers the presence everything, sensation beyond measure, pleasure beyond imagining, experience beyond description, and the presence laughs. Not mockingly, not cruelly, with genuine, infinite amusement. For the presence is desire fulfilled. It is the answer to every question, the satisfaction of every seeking, the destination of every journey. What can temptation offer to one who already possesses everything, because one is everything? Slaanesh recoils, and for the first time understands something that might be humility. The four powers confer, for they are, despite their enmity, aspects of the same phenomenon. Consciousness creating gods from its own fears and hungers. They are the warp, and the warp is them, and both are symptoms of a universe that had gone wrong at some fundamental level. They understand now that they cannot destroy the presence, cannot corrupt it, cannot even properly interact with it, because they are operating at a level of existence so far beneath it that the difference is not even measurable in quantitative terms. And so they do something that the Chaos Gods have never done before. They negotiate. The negotiation is not in words. It is a direct exchange of information and intent at the level of pure concept. The Chaos Gods explain, insofar as such beings can explain, that they are not arbitrary evil. They are the natural consequence of consciousness in a particular type of universe. Beings think and feel and die, and their thoughts and feelings and deaths create echoes in the warp, and those echoes accumulate and crystallize into gods. They are, in their own way, victims of the system that created them. The presence considers this, and the presence offers them a choice. On Terra, in the throne room of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor of Mankind rises. For 10,000 years, he had not moved. For 10,000 years, the Golden Throne had held his dying form in stasis, barely alive, barely conscious, pouring every scrap of his vast psychic power into maintaining the Astronomican and holding back the demon tide. Now he stands, and the sound of his movement is like the grinding of continental plates. The Custodes fall back instinctively, not in fear, but in awe. Their liege lord, their master, the being they have served without question since the unification wars 30,000 years ago, is moving. The Emperor's armor, golden and magnificent, is intact. His sword, the symbol of his right to rule all humanity, is in his hand. He is tall, so tall, 4 meters of engineered perfection. A man, but also so much more than a man. He walks forward, and with each step, the machines of the Golden Throne detach from his body. Tubes withdraw, cables disconnect. The arcane technology that had kept him alive releases its hold. He does not falter, does not weaken, because he is no longer sustained by the throne or by the sacrifice of psychers or by faith. He is sustained by something infinitely greater. The Emperor walks through the Imperial Palace, and those who see him fall to their knees. Not in worship, somehow, worship no longer seems appropriate. In recognition, in greeting, in love, he makes his way to the highest tower, the one that looks out over the hive spires of terror, over the planet that he has called home for 40,000 years. And there, in a way that transcends location and space and time, he meets the presence. They regard each other, creator and creation, infinite and finite, eternal and temporal. The Emperor had thought himself the supreme power in the galaxy. For all practical purposes, he had been. His psychic might was beyond measurement, his will unbreakable, his vision encompassing millennia. He had created the Primarchs, conquered old Earth, launched the Great Crusade, built an empire of 1,000,000 worlds. And he understands now that all of it, every moment of his vast existence, had been preparation for this meeting. Why, the Emperor asks, and his voice shakes reality. Why now? 10,000 years I have struggled. 10,000 years the Imperium has bled and died and held the line. Why not sooner? The answer comes not in words, but in perfect understanding. Because the story was not ready, because the lesson was not learned, because free will means freedom to fail, and you had to fail first to understand what success truly means. The Emperor sees then the shape of the long game, sees how his own pride and certainty had contributed to the Horus heresy, how his denial of the warp's power had made humanity more vulnerable to it, how his attempt to save humanity through domination had created the very tyranny he sought to prevent. He sees his mistakes, all of them, laid bare, and he is not condemned for them. He is thanked, for they were necessary. The story required the protagonist to fall, to struggle, to nearly fail. That is what gives the triumph meaning. What now? The Emperor asks, and there is no pride in his voice anymore, just weariness and hope, and a question that is not really a question because he already knows the answer. Rest, comes the reply. Your work is done. Let others carry the light now. The Emperor looks back at the Imperium, his Imperium, the civilization he built from the ashes of old night. It is cruel, yes, barbaric, fanatical, built on mountains of corpses and sustained by oceans of blood, but it is also magnificent. Humans holding the line against impossible odds, fighting not because they expect to win, but because surrender is unthinkable. Remaining human, flawed, passionate, stubborn, beautiful, in a galaxy that wants to erase them. They will need guidance, he says. They will have it, from you when necessary, but not as a god, never as a god. The Emperor nods, and for the first time in 10,000 years, he smiles. It is a terrible smile, and a joyous one. The smile of a man who has carried an impossible burden and is finally allowed to set it down. He turns and walks back into the palace, and as he does, the imperial cult, that vast religious edifice built around his worship, begins to crumble. Not in violence, not in apostasy, it simply transforms. The ecclesiarchs and cardinals and priests who had preached the emperor's divinity find their words changing in their mouths. They speak now not of a god to be feared and obeyed, but of a protector to be loved and emulated. The difference is subtle but total. The Inquisition, that secret order that had burned heretics and Xenos without mercy, discovers a new kind of investigation, not to destroy difference, but to understand it, not to punish deviation, but to guide it back to truth. The Sisters of Battle lay down their flamers, not forever, for there is still evil in the galaxy that must be fought, but no longer as their first and only answer. The Mechanicus, confronting the reality of the Omnissiah, begins to question their prohibition on innovation. If the machine god is real and loves knowledge, why would it want them to hide from new understanding? Changes, small and large, rippling outward through 1,000,000 worlds. In the warp, the Chaos Gods face their choice. They can continue as they are, parasites on consciousness, feeding on fear and hatred and despair, locked in eternal war with both real space and each other. Or they can transform. The present shows them what they could become. Khorne, god of violence, could become the god of honor, of righteous anger against injustice, of the strength to protect the weak. Tzeentch, god of schemes, could become the god of knowledge, of hope for better tomorrows, of the courage to change. Nurgle, god of decay, could become the god of acceptance, of peace with mortality, of the wisdom that comes from loss. Slaanesh, god of excess, could become the god of passion, of art and beauty, and the full experience of consciousness. They would still be themselves, but they would be themselves perfected, freed from the distortions that had made them monsters. It is, in the end, not even a choice, for they are made of consciousness, and consciousness wants to grow toward light, not fester in darkness. The transformation is not instant. It will take time, but in the warp, time is flexible. The Chaos Gods begin to change, and as they change, the warp itself changes with them. The Eye of Terror shrinks further. The maelstrom calms. Demon worlds across the galaxy find their madness lifting like a fever breaking. The servants of chaos, those who had served from genuine belief rather than corruption, suddenly find themselves serving something that is no longer dark. And those who had served from corruption, from love of cruelty for its own sake, they discover that their power is gone. The gods no longer answer their prayers. They are alone with their choices and the consequences thereof. On Macragge, Raboot Guilliman stands with his honor guard and looks up at the stars. "Is it over?" asks Captain Agamemnon. "No," Guilliman says, "but it is different. The galaxy will still need defenders. There will still be wars to fight. But we fight them now with hope, not just grim necessity. What should we do?" The Primarch considers. He thinks of his father, freed from the Golden Throne. He thinks of the Imperium, beginning its transformation from fascist theocracy into something that might, eventually, resemble the dream that the Emperor had originally held. A galaxy where humans could live in peace and prosperity, using reason rather than faith, science rather than superstition. It would take millennia, perhaps tens of millennia. The Imperium is vast and change moves slowly. There will be resistance, confusion, even violence as the old ways clash with the new. But now, at least, there is a destination, a true one. "We do what we have always done," Guilliman says. "We protect humanity. We build a better future. We give people something to hope for besides death in the Emperor's service." He looks at his captain, this warrior who has known only war, and adds, "And perhaps, when the wars are done, we learn to be men again, instead of just weapons." Agamemnon nods slowly. It is a strange thought. A space marine who is not just a soldier but a person. But in this new galaxy, perhaps it is not impossible. The presence withdraws, not departing. Departure would imply absence, and the presence is never absent from its creation. But the immediate, transforming attention pulls back. Reality, now corrected, is allowed to unfold according to its own nature, its own choices, its own free will. The galaxy is healing. It will take time. There are still orcs who want to fight, Tyranids who hunger, Dark Eldar who torture, Necrons who wake from their tombs with ancient grudges. Evil has not been deleted from the universe. Suffering has not been eliminated, but it has been given meaning, purpose, the possibility of ending and transcendence. The Emperor, in his palace, meditates. He is still connected to the Astronomican, but now it is a choice rather than a necessity. He guides it, shapes it, but he is not consumed by it. He speaks with his returning sons, for across the galaxy, the Primarchs who are not dead, merely lost, begin to find their way home. Lemon Russ, from the depths of the warp, where he had hunted the traitor Magnus. Vulcan, from his long odyssey of self-discovery. The Khan, from the dark between stars. And yes, even the Lion, from his sleep in the rock, the fortress monastery of the Dark Angels. They return, and they find their father changed, humbler, wiser, and finally willing to admit that he does not have all the answers. Together, they begin to rebuild. Not the Imperium as it was, that monument to fear and hatred and desperate survival, but something new, something that honors what humanity has endured while releasing it from the need to endure further. A true Imperium of man, where man means something more than just fuel for the war machine. On distant worlds, ordinary humans begin to dream of peace. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, those dreams start to become reality. The Tau, that young race that had preached the greater good, finds suddenly that the Imperium is willing to talk rather than just shoot. Negotiations begin. Trade routes open. It is tentative, suspicious, but it is contact without war. The Eldar, ancient and dying, discover that Slanesh's grip on their souls is loosening. They cannot be saved from She Who Thirsts. What was consumed is gone forever. But perhaps their children, the yet unborn, might live without that curse. It is more hope than they have had in 10,000 years. Even the Necrons, those ancient machines trying to reclaim flesh, find that their quest has not been in vain. The presence does not give them their bodies back. That would violate the consequences of their own choices, but it shows them that the Citan, the star gods who had deceived them, are not all-powerful, can be resisted, can perhaps even be forgiven if they choose forgiveness. The galaxy begins to breathe. In the warp, the Chaos Gods complete their transformation. They are still vast, still powerful, still gods, but they are no longer chaos. They are the divine forces, honor and knowledge and acceptance and passion. They remember what they were, and they are ashamed, and from that shame comes growth. Their demons transform with them. Bloodletters become champions of justice. Horrors become seekers of truth. Plague bearers become guides for the dying. Demonettes become muses of art. It is strange. It is miraculous. It is the ending of the age of war and the beginning of something that has no name yet, because it has never existed before in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Peace, not total, not universal, but possible. On Terra, in the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor stands and looks out at the stars. The Astronomican blazes behind him, no longer blood red, but white as the heart of a sun, visible from any point in the galaxy. He thinks of all he has done, all he has seen, all he has lost, his sons corrupted and slain, his Imperium twisted into a nightmare, his dream deferred for 10 millennia, and he understands now that it was all necessary. The long game required the long suffering. That is what makes the victory sweet, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of meaning in the struggle. He feels the presence beside him, not visible, but known. "Thank you," the Emperor says, and means it. "You are welcome, my child, but the thanks are not required. You are always loved. You always will be. What do I do now? Live, truly live, for the first time in 40,000 years. Be a father to your sons, a guide to humanity, and when your work is finally done, come home, home." The presence does not answer in words, but the Emperor feels it, the promise of rest beyond ending, of a reward beyond imagination, of a place where even gods can lay down their burdens and simply exist in joy. He had been fighting for so long he had forgotten what he was fighting for. Now he remembers, and it is good. The Emperor turns from the window and walks back into the palace. There is much work to do. The Imperium will not transform overnight. There will be resistance from the old guard, from those whose power depends on the current system, from those too broken by suffering to accept that healing is possible. But it will transform, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. And he will guide it, not as a god, but as a man. Across the galaxy, a billion souls pause in their labor, in their worship, in their war, and look up. They do not know what has changed. Most will never understand, never even be aware that anything significant occurred, but they feel it nonetheless. The background radiation of despair that had permeated the galaxy for 10,000 years lifts, not gone, not erased, but changed, made bearable, given meaning. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is still war. But now, for the first time, there is also the possibility of peace. And that, perhaps, is the greatest miracle of all. The Presence watches all of this, satisfied. The story is not over. Stories never truly end when they involve free beings capable of choice. But this chapter has closed. The Warhammer 40,000 universe, that monument to grimdark fatalism, has been given what it needed most. Not salvation, but the possibility of salvation. Not peace, but the ability to choose peace. Not the end of suffering, but the understanding that suffering can have meaning and purpose and terminal horizon. The galaxy will continue. Wars will be fought. Battles will be lost. Heroes will rise and fall. But underneath it all, like a new foundation beneath a repaired building, there is now truth. And truth, the Presence knows, is the only thing that can set creation free. In the silence after transformation, in the stillness between old story and new, the Presence withdraws its immediate attention and allows the universe to unfold. And it is very good.